Okay, so today is June 12th, and I'm with Ha. My name is Chelsea Wen, interviewing Matt Manilow. So the first question is, can you talk about founding Philippine X Artists of Houston and what your vision for it is?
Um, Philippine X Artists of Houston. We founded it last year, June last year, so it's almost about a year now. Um, Originally, because I've just been an artist, um, kind of like working for myself and making work for myself. I've always had that emptiness of community and being able to share things. I mean, I did have a Filipino community. It's just there wasn't anything that was just mainly focused on art. So yeah, the um, I attended a Filipino art show at Asia Society of Texas, and I was able to meet Bridget Bray there, who's the curator, um, and then I brought up the whole idea of like, hey, we also have Filipino artists here in Houston, and I would love, to work with you, and maybe Asia Society could be a part of it, and um, so she was really interested in starting that conversation, and they've been really supportive, and they even provided us, a space to meet at every month. So we've been meeting there, and the goal really is the main goal is representation, and then also I wanted to create an environment where Filipino artists um, could rely on their artistic practices as a form of income and find stability in that. Um, Especially that there has never been a Filipino arts community in Houston before, so this is like the very first one. Um, and yeah, also, just to change. I mean, we've had this conversation before, just to change the whole idea of Filipinos being, in other jobs, not just nurses or teachers. I wanted to also open the eyes of a lot of parents, so that they can be supportive of their kids who wants to be artists in the future. So yeah.
Cool. So do you guys plan events or I don't know, seminars or something?
Yeah, we've already had a couple of film showings. We've sponsored some film showings, and then we've had poetry readings. We've invited big name authors to do some book or poetry reading here in Houston. We've done talks, seminars, and then right now we're trying to um, raise some money and work with NAFCON Texas to, via art auction, so that we could help the J1 workers and how they've been affected by the pandemic.
Mhm. What are J1 workers?
They're basically uh, they're workers who are currently here in Houston, and they're all over the country, but we're working to help the ones here in Houston, particularly. They're here on a work visa, but then it's sort of like an exchange student kind of thing. So um, their visa is only valid through their employment. So they've been working here uh, at the Marriott. So, and because of the pandemic, the hotel um, industry has really been affected by it. So they weren't able to get any kind of income through this whole pandemic. So, we wanted to reach out and help out in any way we can.
Mhm. Um, so kind of related to that, are there any, what kind of government resources or aid would you like to see like during this pandemic?
I just recently saw news of the education secretary
Mm.
saying no to financial aid for DACA holders. Um, I think that's very unfortunate because, um, as we would like to see our country, talk about how we we are kind of like a melting pot of everyone. So I think it's also important that even DACA holders should be able to have access to these financial help, especially within the pandemic, um, because they are here to better themselves and to make the country better in their own ways. So yeah, I'd like to see more support and more inclusivity in the government to um, to help. I mean, even undocumented immigrants who are here and are working. I wish to see more of that.
Mhm. Um, so I also saw that you started a Leaf Art House. Can you talk about that?
Elif Art House uh, also kind of began at almost the same time as the Filipinx Artists of Houston. It is a project from my fellowship with Diverse Works called Project Freeway Fellowship, and I was able to acquire this space with help of International District of Houston, which is the people managing ALEAF. Um, ALEAF is known as the most diverse district here in Houston. And there's a lot of culture already going on, like food and other festivals, but there really hasn't anything that was also focused on art. So I decided to purchase a shipping container and put it in the middle of the community garden space and activate the art scene in ALEAF over there. Um, so yeah, it's basically an art space where we get to showcase art by um, Black Indigenous people of color, residents of ALEAF. Um, and then we try to be really inclusive with our programming. Also including artists who are part of QTPC. And yeah, just trying to activate the art in the neighborhood and 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 just see what kind of change we can bring. It's almost like my goal for Filipinx Arts of Houston is almost the same as the ALEAF Art House, because it's based off of the whole idea of kapwa, which is a Tagalog term for being basically like a good neighbor. So so trying to be supportive of artists here in ALEAF uh, in terms of being able to support them with their practice and yeah, be able to uh, showcase their creativity that is not having to go out of the neighborhood. So we can think about not having like costs of travel and all that, and maybe shipping of artwork or something like that. So yeah, um, it's community based art space.
Mhm. So what kind of events do you guys hold there?
For my first year with Diverse Works, I did some arts workshop as well as featuring the residents of ALEAF and also people who are deeply rooted in the community. And then I also collaborated with local creatives. So I had four events. The first one was People of A-Leaf, so kind of like People of or Humans of New York.
Mhm.
Um, with a photo and then a little quotation from uh, from the people that we interviewed, and we were basically asking why they love A-Leaf and what it means to them to be a part of the neighborhood. And then the second one was a community weaving, um, and the the artist who I worked with, Danny Wynn, who's an internationally known uh, fashion designer. He built a giant loom for us, and the whole event was basically community weaving. Um, we we were trying to weave the community symbolically and literally through that.
Mhm.
Um, and then um, and then we also had an event where we did like card making and cyanotypes. Um, yeah, yeah, that's it so far. And then for this year, we've worked with another local artist, Thomas Tran. Um, and this is through installations with the Art League of Houston. And I'm collaborating with Antonia Spooey. Um, um, so Thomas painted a new mural for the A-Leaf Art House, and then he's showcasing some of his works as an illustrator inside the space. And then it's going to be a whole year of programming till January of next year.
Mhm. So when you started thinking about becoming an artist, did you expect that you would have such a strong presence in the community and like building a community?
Um, Honestly, not really, because when I started becoming an artist, I was just really thinking about myself and what kind of message I was going to put out there. Um, you know, what kind of work I was planning to make and what kind of, like artistic presence that I was going to have. So most of it was just basically about myself. And as I said earlier, it was from that emptiness that I felt like, you know, I feel like there was like a higher calling for me, and that I needed to work with more people and be able to um, almost like the whole idea of being somebody that I needed when I was starting off.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, so sharing opportunities, knowledge, of what I've experienced in the art world, working as an artist for more than 10 years. Yeah, and then through that, I'm also constantly learning and being humbled with with other people's works and knowledge. So it's a very mutual um, experience to be working with community. But yeah, I never realized or I never even thought about um, building that.
Mhm. How do you think it's changed the way you make art or think about it?
Um, it definitely changed
Mm.
the way I see art as, because when I started, my goal was just like, okay, make work, make sure you're talking to the right people, and then get into the right places, and then eventually be exhibited in the museum. That was my goal. Now my goal is to make work, um, and if I can, um, you know, have a foot in and then bring everyone else with it with me, you know. And but then in terms of like my personal art practice, it also um, you know, changed the way um, like almost like the value of my work because I'm also working with community, then that means also um, there will be a lot of times where we will be, you know, maybe exchanging work or, you know, just for fun or like let's say like the art auction that we're doing for the J1 workers, um, and basically making my work more accessible for everyone rather than just it being in a gallery or a museum where it's kind of like not accessible to everyone, um, where it's a white space that is almost intimidating to be in. So that was also part of like the whole idea with the A-Leaf Art House is I wanted everyone to be able to access art. Um, you know, I mean, being in a neighborhood that's really diverse, some or most of the residents haven't even probably been inside the museum, you know, or they've never stepped inside the museum because of that whole elitist factor attached to it almost, where you get judged if you don't look like them or if you don't know anything. You know, I wanted to change that and be able to just bring art to the neighborhood rather than the neighborhood trying to go to a museum and, you know, um, and make it and have like a bad experience because of like what the whole museum or gallery expects viewers to be.
So how have community events in A-Leaf changed during the pandemic?
Um, it's been hard, especially with the whole, um, you know, idea and stereotyping that the pandemic or you know the racist um, ideology attached with the virus. So you know, because A-Leaf is also part of Chinatown, um, so there was a lot of for the A-Leaf Art House alone, we had to cancel or we had to cancel a lot of events because of the pandemic and just following guidelines with that. But then also, you know, some people were just worried that they would be um, stereotyped or experience some racist situation. Um, but then, you know, with the A-Leaf Art House, we had to um, figure out a way where we can still um, support the artist um, as well as be able to um, kind of like uplift the the neighborhood as well in some way. So um, Thomas really did a good job of putting the mural that's really colorful and you know it gives hope to whoever's passing by because you can see it from the street. So anyone who's driving by could see it, and you know in that way we're still activating the art and something visual and something that's different. Um, and then on my side, because I'm running the space, um, I kind of like acquired a new skill of like video documenting and making like a video or putting together like a video for Thomas, you know, so that I could also kind of showcase his work properly, even if we don't have any kind of art show opening. Um, so yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a little difficult, especially for Chinatown businesses. You know, because I don't really go to big grocery stores, and I go to the Asian grocery stores, and
Mhm.
there's really not a lot of folks that go. Even at this time, it's not as packed as it used to be, which is kind of sad. There's a couple of small shops that I know who are just closing, and they've been around for like more than 20 years. And it's just kind of sad that they're getting affected that way. Um,
Um, so how much of your work has been transitioned to Zoom and FaceTime, and how does that compare to in-person stuff?
oh, it's been really hard. I'm the type of person who doesn't really like being in front of the computer a lot. I get headaches, and that's just one of the things that I try to limit my computer use. Um, but I've been doing a lot of like webinars and talks through Zoom. Um, Even like a performance that I did with Common Field. Uh, so yeah, a lot of it has been Zoom based, which is really sad because I like doing stuff in person and being able to see the person, being able to um, or be within a community. Um, and then with that idea as well, then because my work is very physical, like it demands physical space and almost making want the audience to touch them or experience them. So that has been difficult as well. But I've I've also been trying my hand on digital work, and I've been enjoying it so far. Just trying to see different avenues of where I can express my thought ideas in the digital realm or internet sphere. It's been good so far. I mean, I'm learning a lot, definitely.
Do you mean like digital illustration or?
um, More of like animation and video
Mhm.
based work, like a lot of video editing, um, or like music or something like that, using old um, tourism videos of the Philippines. Yeah, I mean, it's been fun. It's just, I'm used to really interacting with people in person. So, I mean, our first interview was in person, so that was different, and um, but yeah, it 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 definitely the whole pandemic has changed um, the way I've seen art and I've accessed art. So it also made me, think about how I make work and and question like, is my work really accessible? If what if it was somebody who didn't have Instagram, or what if it was somebody who didn't have internet access? Then how am I able to make my work accessible? So um, yeah, hopefully we'll figure things out. Those are still questions that I have in my head. You know, uh, yeah.
Um, do you think that being in the pandemic has forced you to learn new things or become more creative?
um, yes and no. Yes, because like what I said earlier with the new digital work. or series that I've been making. It kind of forced me to um, to just really sit down and and explore more digital tools, rather than the ones that I'm used to working with my hands and all that. And no, because um, because my studio's at home as well, so there's also a lot of family time and different priorities at home that I need to tend to. Um, so um, yeah, it's just a matter of like really getting to sit down and make sure that I'm putting enough time and balancing everything. Unlike before, where like the kids are at school, then I have all the time for myself to make work. Yeah, then it's been completely different.
Mhm. Have you seen any impacts of the pandemic on the art community in Houston?
Yeah, um, yeah, because with Antonius and I, when we're working with the fellowship through installations at the Art League, we decided to switch out some of the programming money and allocate it as a some sort of relief fund. Um, and through that relief fund, we asked people to submit like a 3 sentence, like a one paragraph of why we should consider them. So a lot of folks have been saying that they've been misplaced or they've lost their jobs, or they or a lot of their art gigs were canceled and all that. Um so we heard like some um first degree experiences of what these people are going through, and in that sense we want to help them out through that funding. And then at the same time, so whoever we chose, we're also going to give them a show. So they're going to be part of a group show later this year. Um, so we can help them more, whether it's an exposure through their artwork or a sale. I mean, if they sell their work, then they get 100% of it. So, um, yeah. But then also for myself, I've lost a lot of opportunities as well. Like I was supposed to have a solo show in April, and that was postponed.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I'm not the only one who got affected. There's a lot more, and probably even got worse situations
Mhm.
than me. So yeah.
Um, are there other financial resources for artists who are suffering during this time?
Um, I believe so. The main artist, the one that provides the most, or the main institution that does that, Houston Arts Alliance, I think they were, but then right now that the grants are kind of closed. But for local ones, at least, that's what I know. There might not be any resources right now, but there are nationwide ones, and I recently applied for one, and I was able to get a little funding from that. But yeah, it's basically the whole idea of. I'm also a big believer of community care, so it's a lot of like people chipping in and and putting together like a fund and then redistributing that So I've seen a couple um, that are specifically for artists, and you know, it's almost like a no questions asked. You just need to apply kind of thing. So yeah, it's good to see that there are people doing more um, um, than just, you know, spreading the word about it. But yeah, they're actually trying to help people get some funding as well.
Mhm. Um, have you, are people finding other ways to get around not being able to travel or hold shows in person? Or like, are there any other solutions that you've seen artists do?
Um, I've seen somebody who set up like his own house into a gallery, and he basically does like an art show of his own work, which I thought was pretty cool. Um, and then there's another thing of doing mail art. So they exchange. I was part of a nationwide mail art exchange. And so in a way, you know, you're receiving real work and getting to experience it in person as well. Um, uh, yeah, and mostly it's digital, you know, Instagram shows and all that, which makes me also curious about how institutions are viewing or how they think about um, what really matters now. You know, like is it still a valid show if it was an Instagram show, or you know, or or just the whole idea of accessibility again, when it comes to um, the pandemic, and even without the pandemic, like how is the art supposed to be shown, or who can see it, or who's allowed to see it, or who's able to access that, or you know, just a lot of questions involved, but I think they're good questions which will
Um,
benefit a lot of, you know,
mhm,
artists, especially um, black and people of color artists.
mhm. Um, do you think people will retain these new techniques or like these Instagram shows in the future?
I hope so, um, because they're fun, and and I think one of the reasons why they do that is to bring the community together. So I think that's great, and without having to, it's almost like a really um, fast and cost-effective way of getting work out there. So yeah, I wish to see more of it in the future, and because with that, I think people are also pushed to explore new ideas of how to um, display the work, or how to, you know, I mean, I've seen ones where it's like a virtual reality tour, and I thought that was kind of weird, but um, because it kind of brings me back to like the 90s where virtual thing was a thing,
Mhm.
and you know, and then I just can't believe that we're kind of like bringing that back. But yeah, definitely, it's basically pushing a lot of boundaries, you know, that has been complacent, you know, that has been not complacent but static for a while now. um Wait, not static, um but it changes like traditions almost, you know, like what I mentioned earlier, like does the art show have to be in a gallery space to be a good art show, or you know, or I don't know, I guess just like how things are validated through space, money, and audience. Yeah,
Mm.
like you can have a show in the middle of the desert and the whole world can see it, you know. So that really changes accessibility to a lot. Um, you know, and you know, or let's say you have a room in the middle of um, nowhere, or or people wouldn't even go to because of racial stereotypes or anything like that. Um, so then, yeah, it just really changes a lot of things on how the work is viewed. So yeah, I want to see more of it.
Mm. Um, how do you think the pandemic has changed your perspective on the future?
Hmm. On the future in general,
Yeah.
yeah, that nothing is permanent. Um, you know, it makes you think about the time and how the present is more valuable than being anxious about the future. um, yeah, and then even like in terms of like values, it makes you think about like or priorities, like what like living in Houston, you know, where everyone drives and commutes. It made me realize that people are capable of working at home. You know, like work at home is possible. Um, so if if a lot of companies did that, then it will save gas. It will save, you know, a lot of things. And then looking at that in the bigger picture, um, is that office space really important? You know, or um, you know, or I don't know. I mean, just like it's mostly related to capitalism and material things. So
Mhm.
like now, like um like like the clothes that I have, you know, like they're just sitting in my closet, you know, and like, do I really need them? Like, you know, or do I need, let's say, like, do I need like 5 pairs of shoes? You know, just simple stuff like that. I don't know. It really it makes me question a lot of things, and made me prioritize a lot of things even more. Like I've had more time tending my garden, so you know I want to basically just have food available and not having to pay for it, um, and then getting my family involved in it as well, and then um, even Philippine X Artists of Houston we kind of have like a subgroup of people who garden, so we do, you know, kind of like exchange plants and try to explore our history, our culture through that, through food. Um, so yeah, I mean, you really get down to the basics again, and humbles you down, and just think about things that really matter.
Mhm. Going back to Philippine X Artists of Houston, um, how does it felt to connect with so many different disciplines of art? And has that changed the way that you create art?
um, because it's like the first art focused community in Houston, I wanted to be inclusive as well, like through all the art practices. So we have um, people involved in performing arts like theater or film or and then we have spoken word artists, poets, writers. We have musicians. We have people who do dance and do performance art through that, and then we have the visual artists, who do tattoos or do sculptures or make paintings. So um, I feel like it kind of rubbed on me a little bit now that I'm also doing a little bit of performance art there, and I'm being more confident with my poetry sometimes. Um, and then I'm also exploring more into how my work already takes up space, but then just the whole idea of how much space that it takes up. So it then it becomes more of a sculpture rather than something that hangs on the wall. Um, and then you know, and then within that group of artists, we also have culinary chefs and um, and then we get to share all of these things together. And it's really humbling, because originally I thought that we would only be 20, and now we're like, I wasn't expecting to have like a group of people like that's almost like 40 people, active members, um, with all different backgrounds, with all different experiences in the art world, and it's good though that I thought I was gonna be some sort of like teacher or like person who is going to guide people, but then at the same time I'm the one being guided, I'm the one being taught. So it's very humbling to be surrounded by people who have like so many stories to tell. And yeah, I mean, and that's the reason why I'm just glad that it happened finally.
Mhm. Do you guys ever partner with other Philippine X organizations or other cultural organizations?
Yeah, we do. We've partnered recently with the Pacific Arts Movement, I think, and they're based in LA. And then we co-sponsored the film showing, um, and then like with the J1 workers, we're collaborating with NAFCON Texas, which is a national. Um, well, we're working with the local um, group, but then it's a national initiative as well. Yeah, so that's like one of the few examples that we've worked with several, not only arts organizations, but pretty much whoever wants to collaborate with us. We try to, you know, try to support as much as we can.
Mhm. Um, what do you think the pandemic has revealed about structural inequalities in our society?
Um, I think it made people see more of it. Um, like because then it made us think about like um, all the money that's being spent on other things when really we need money or funding for national natural disasters or or for um, um, or for just health um, related services for everyone. You know, unfortunately, our city mayor. still wants to give more than $1 billion to the police, which I think is absurd. Um, I think that we should focus all that money to social services, because that's also part of like what the pandemic has exposed, is that we need the services to support mental health care and just services for everyone who needs it. um, and maybe we'll be able to um, lower down the chances of Black people getting killed within the hands of the police. And um, yeah, I mean, that was already one thing that we were dealing with, and then it kind of exposed it even more, with George Floyd's death. Um, so yeah, I mean, there needs to be some structural change for sure, and I wish, you know, um, the city mayor would listen to his people,
Mhm.
since he is the public servant who's serving the public, rather than thinking about um, capitalizing um, on the diversity of the city. I think, especially that it's most diverse, then he should be listening to all of the different cultures and different voices that our community has. Uh, yeah.
Um, what role do you think Asian Americans have played in the Black Lives Matter movement?
Um, it's it's ugly and beautiful at the same time. Ugly because for the longest time we've worked so hard to be the model minority, but also beautiful that we're finally trying to take a stand and be there for our um, Black brothers and sisters. You know, I mean, that's one of the reasons why there was an Asian guy at the movie Get Out, because we were the most white leaning minorities, and being part of that doesn't really help um, uplifting the Black lives. Uh, and, for me, as in, as part of being Asian, it's my responsibility to change that and to be there and to have the right knowledge and resources to be able to, even like we're just talking to my family about it and trying to make them see um, what Black folks go through every day, or even at the time when they're born. They already experience a lot of injustices. Yeah, I mean, I talk about it in my work already about colorism, and how, because Filipinos are also huge on anti-Blackness, and it's sad that I'm part of that community, but then it also motivates me to think that I have a greater responsibility of changing that and making my own Filipino folks to see that we shouldn't be against them, that we need to help them be free, because it's only because I believe that if we liberate Black lives, then all of us will be free. Um, yeah.
Mhm. Um, how do you think the community can work to alter these dangerous viewpoints of colorism and things like that?
Um, I think the one of the first things we should do is acknowledge our privilege, and know it and learn it and learn from it and see what that privilege is. And then through that, um, we need to learn um, the tools of how we can really highlight Black voices. I mean, you know, the resources are already out there, um, and they've even like, you know, Black folks have even like spoon fed us all of these things. It's just a matter of like really acknowledging what we have and and taking advantage of those resources that's already been put out there for us to learn and to practice. And then, you know, after doing that self work, then we can start within our families, and then, you know, once we've done it with our families, then we can work on our community um, in doing that. Uh, but I think, yeah, I think really focusing on doing the self work first is most important. Uh,
Do you think that George Floyd's death and protests have caused a shift in how Asian Americans think about this or their role in this?
yeah, um, yes, and I hope so, because I can't speak for everyone. Um, yes, because I'm seeing a lot of Asian Americans being more vocal about their solidarity, um, and have created spaces for us to learn and be able to point out that privilege that we have, um, and you know, even calling each other out, I think, is huge. Um, and just having those conversations, even if they're difficult. I mean, we're even putting out resources on how to speak to your parents, you know, about racism, and they even come in like different languages. So I think we as a community um, are really trying our best. You know, I mean, we don't need to get applauded for that, because that's something that we owe to the Black folks who've lost their lives and who've broken their backs to build this country up and not getting any kind of recognition for it. So yeah, I hope we keep doing that without expecting any kind of recognition, because it's not really about us. You know, the fight isn't about us. Um, and yeah, I mean, I've even just like within my Facebook timeline alone, like I would post something and then like an uncle would comment or a friend would comment like, oh, like that is not the truth, blah blah blah. And then just having those difficult conversations, I think, will at least start something, you know, like plant the seed and see how it grows, kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, we're working.
Mhm.
So it's good to see that.
Do you think the art community has a role in uplifting the Black community?
Oh yeah, yeah, huge. I think it has a
Mm.
huge role, um, because um, you know, one way of doing that is providing, you know, space for them to display their creativity. And another way would be supporting their creativity by collecting their work or looking at their work. Um, and yeah, I mean, just the whole idea of being supportive in so many ways, I think will benefit that, because you know, and then that's where we think about structures as well. Like if Black artists are able to have a comfortable income just through their art, then just by being supported through their art, then you know, then they don't really have to like force themselves in comfortable spaces, you know. You know, a lot of galleries out there don't even have any black artists represented in their roster, or museums don't even have a lot of black artists in their collection. So this whole um, incident with George Floyd's death um, has changed a lot of like these institutions and how they can be more supportive. I know the Manil just acquired a piece from a black artist that I know in town. Um, so uh, yeah, I mean, there's so many ways that we can do that, and I'm glad that people are really opening their eyes to all these possibilities that um, that a black artist can make a living out of his own work. That there's an audience for it. Um, that there's a way that they can express themselves even better. Um, yeah, I mean, you know, to have just to have the idea that there's a community that supports you for your work, then I think is really important.
Um, so are you optimistic about the future?
Yeah, I am.
Mhm. Do you think there are lessons that we're learning during this pandemic that will help you or help the art community in the future?
Uh, yeah, I mean, because uh, thinking about that, I've been thinking about that recently, and I was just having thoughts of, you know, like if I think that, then there's probably more than one of me out there. Um, uh, so that makes me hopeful and optimistic about the future. Um, and then, you know, like what we talked about earlier, just the whole structure of the art world is being questioned within this pandemic. And even like with George Floyd's death, um, a lot of galleries and institutions are opening their eyes to um, a rich um, source of creativity, you know, through black artists that they've just been ignoring this whole time when they've been making work, they've been existing this whole time. Um, yeah, I'm hopeful. You know, one of the main reasons I'm doing the work that I do is uh, because I want my kids to have a good future, or to have a future that where we can't. Um, I mean, I'm sure it's still gonna exist, but where racism isn't a thing, or you know, like racial inequality isn't a thing, because my kids are, you know, people of color, so I know they're not going to benefit from white privilege in any way. So yeah, and a lot of my friends are also parents, and they have the same goals for their kids. Um, so being surrounded by people who have the same priorities makes me more hopeful, and they're also artists, so you know that also gives me hope for the art world. Um, you know, I mean, within the span of 5 years, we've somebody like uh, I forgot his first name, Canders, who owns Safari Land, who provides the tear gas um, that the police has been using. Stepped down out of the Whitney, of being the board of Whitney, and then he mentioned recently that he's also stepping out of the whole tear gas business. So I mean, we're seeing some changes.
Mhm. Um, do you talk to your kids about race in America?
Yeah, yeah, I do. Um, it's easier to talk to my 15-year-old about it because she experiences it. Um, with my 6-year-old, it's getting there. He doesn't quite grasp the whole idea yet, but yeah, like I mean, with just like simple questions, like he there was one time where he said like, "Daddy, you're so brown," and then I said, "Yeah, I'm very brown and I'm proud of it." That's what I always tell him, and he even repeats it, that I'm really proud of it. And um, so I mean, those are just one of the instances, or small things that um, I can help him see. Uh, the whole idea of race and why it's a thing. And I mean, I even like when we play games, I always pick like a person of color as like the main character, or you know or or I let him watch shows where it's a more diverse character selection. And like it's not just like He-Man where everyone's just white. Or um yeah. But then I think also part of that is like changing the whole um way that we use the term black. Like it's been used for centuries as like something negative, right? Like black plague, or black market, just like how it's always um it always means like something negative. So I think if we could change the whole idea, or how we use the term black, then I think that's also like one simple way of of um, uplifting the Black lives.
Mhm. Um, do you think the Filipinx community has been affected more heavily during the pandemic because a large portion of the population is like involved in nursing or like healthcare?
Uh, yeah. I mean, my dad's a first responder, so yeah. I mean, it just affected in a way where we're at a higher risk. Um, and um, I don't know. I've been hearing a lot of like different stories, where a lot of like Filipino folks don't even want to do um, nursing anymore, just because the pandemic has made it like extra difficult for them. And then um, it's just, yeah. I mean, just alone, just my dad alone being a first responder makes me worry about him and worry about my mom, because um, and because he has to go home to my mom every day, then being high risk, and my mom, um, who's immunocompromised, kind of like makes me worry about that all the time. um, and yeah, just the whole idea that a lot of Filipino folks are first responders. I think affected affects them affects us in that sense. um I haven't really heard of any um Filipinos in the medical field who's been um laid off or anything. So I think that's how we're dealing with that, I think.
Um, is there anything else you want to say in the interview?
Oh, I think uh, one thing I would like to say is that us being Asians or Filipinos, Pacific Islanders, we have a lot of work to do, and and um, especially that we suffer from the whole idea of being that model minority. I think it's our responsibility to really work so hard and uplift Black lives um, in any way that we can, and that really starts off within ourselves. So, you know, um, it's a lot of work. It's not easy, but we can do it um, because, like what I said earlier, when Black lives are free, then we will be free.
Mhm. Um, well, thank you so much for talking with me.
Yeah, thank you, Chelsea.
Yeah.